Penguin Random House Audio presents Master of the Senate, The Years of Lyndon Johnson, Book 3, Part 2 of a 3-part recording by Robert A. Caro, read by Grover Gardner.
Part 3. Looking for It. Chapter 15. No Choice. Leadership positions in the Senate were hardly among the prizes of American politics, with good reason. The Constitution had provided that there be a Speaker for the House of Representatives, and during the century and a half since its ratification, a succession of forceful speakers had buttressed that office with rules and precedents that made it strong. Over the Senate, however, the Founding Fathers wanted no one to have authority, and the Constitution they wrote therefore provided only that it be presided over by the Vice President, who shall have no vote unless they be equally divided, or, in his absence, by a President pro tempore. And the Senate's rules limited the powers of the Vice President or any other presiding officer so strictly that they were little more than figureheads. The Senate shall choose their other officers, the Constitution said, but the only officers to be choosed were administrative subordinates: a Secretary of the Senate, a Sergeant-at-Arms, a chaplain. The Senate had certainly chosen no leaders. Why would the ambassadors of sovereign states want to be led? A senator referred to as a leader, majority leader or minority leader, was therefore leader not of the Senate, but only of his party's senators, elected not by the Senate but by them, in a party conference or caucus, to chair the caucuses and lead their parties on the Senate floor. During the first 124 years of the Senate's existence, there were no leaders even in this limited sense. Until 1913, when newspapers mentioned Senate leaders, they were referring, as one study states, to leadership exercised through an individual's oratorical, intellectual, or political skills, not from any party designation, formal or informal. The chairmen of standing committees were generally the ones to move that the Senate consider legislation reported by their committees. The scheduling of legislation was coordinated, when and if it was coordinated, by party policy committees. As Woodrow Wilson wrote in his 1885 classic Congressional Government, "No one is the senator. No one may speak for his party as well as himself. No one exercises acknowledged leadership." When, during the Gilded Age, the GOP instituted tight control of its senators, the control was group control. The Republican Senate bloc was run not by one senator, but by the Senate Four, and even then only through their domination of the larger party steering committee. After the turn of the century, as the ascension of America to world power and of Wilson to America's presidency necessitated increased coordination of activities within the Senate, party caucuses began to regularly designate caucus chairmen, who were sometimes called leaders, but there was still no official designation of a floor leader. No single senator exercised central management of the legislative process, Walter Oleszek states. Baronial committee chairmanships still provided the chamber's internal leadership. In the opinion of most students of the Senate, so murky is the body's administrative history that there is little general agreement on the subject, it was not until 1913 that one of the caucus chairmen, Democrat John Worth Kern of Indiana, was generally referred to as a majority leader, although, as Floyd M. Riddick, the longtime Senate parliamentarian, puts it, Kern still lacked any official party designation other than caucus chairman. In 1913, also, the Democratic caucus elected an assistant leader called a whip, after the whipper-in of a British fox hunt who was assigned to keep the hounds from straying, whipping them back into line if necessary. He was J. Hamilton Lewis of Illinois, known as the biggest dude in America because of the stylishness of his clothes. Kern and the majority leaders who came after him, 5 Democrats, one of whom, Oscar Underwood of Alabama, became in 1920 the first officially designated Democratic leader, as well as the first leader to sit at the front row center aisle desk, and 4 Republicans, had no formal powers. The Senate had given them none. In the 40 rules that were designed to govern all its activities, there is not a single mention of a majority or a minority leader, of a leader of any type. Riddick's 1,076-page volume, Senate Procedure, published in 1974 to expand and amplify the rules, contains exactly one reference to leaders, an explanation that custom had established the practice of priority of recognition. If more than one senator was requesting the floor, recognition should be granted first to the majority leader and then to the minority leader. The Democrats had decided to designate a leader in 1913 primarily because Wilson and progressive senators felt that the president's program would have a better chance of passage if the party's senators were united under a single senator. Kern acted primarily as Wilson's agent, following the president's dictates in scheduling Senate business. Nor was Kern Wilson's only agent in the Senate. Indeed, at times the president seemed to be dealing more with the powerful committee chairman than with the supposed leader. And as the president's power waned, so did Kern's, since his authority as leader was merely a function of presidential backing. Kern was in fact defeated for re-election in 1916 when Wilson failed to carry Indiana. And the same was true of the majority leaders who followed Kern, even though the best known of them, Joseph T. Robinson of Arkansas, would be a memorable figure on the Senate floor, pounding his desk and flailing his arms. He roars his sneers and shouts and bellows until his opponents are drowned out by the volume of sound and the violence of enunciation, Alsop and Catledge wrote. Elected Democratic leader in 1925, Robinson was minority leader until 1933, when the Roosevelt landslide made him majority leader, and he ran his party with a firm hand, dividing up Senate patronage, appointing as Senate employees men loyal to him, disciplining rebellious senators. But he ran it on behalf of the president, no matter who the president happened to be. During the first 10 years of his leadership it was Coolidge and Hoover, and Robinson supported and had Senate Democrats support many Republican policies. For example, he helped Coolidge kill government operation of Muscle Shoals, supplied enough Democratic votes to pass the Hoover tariff, and cut off a proposed Senate investigation of the Power Trust. Robinson's leadership of the Senate coincided, moreover, with one of the most distressing periods of Senate impotence. During the Depression years of 1930, 1931, and 1932, Democrats held a de facto majority in the Senate, but when Wagner, La Follette, and Norris proposed measures, many of them backed by a majority of their party, to alleviate America's pain, Robinson stood not with them but with President Hoover. In 1931, for example, his party, together with progressive Republicans and independents, favored a massive drought relief program for America's desperate farmers. And at first so did Robinson, himself the son of an impoverished farm family. But when Hoover insisted on a more modest program, a program so meager as to be all but useless, Robinson abruptly switched to the president's side, calling the liberal proposal a socialistic dole, in an abject surrender that a fellow Southern Democrat, Alban Barkley, called the most humiliating spectacle that could be brought about in an intelligent legislative body. In 1932, with America still begging for congressional leadership, Robinson said, "I know there is great unhappiness and dissatisfaction, but I do not think any legislation can secure correction." He has given more aid to Herbert Hoover than any other Democrat, Al Smith declared. It was only after the president was Franklin Roosevelt that corrective legislation began to pass. During the 100 days, journalists glorified Robinson for the speed with which he rushed bills through. The humorist Will Rogers said that Congress doesn't pass legislation anymore, they just wave at the bills as they go by. The bills going by, however, were not Robinson's but Roosevelt's, and increasingly they were bills for which Robinson, at heart a typical Southern conservative, had a deep distaste. When he tried to explain his doubts to Roosevelt, however, the president, not interested, as the author Donald C. Bacon writes, in Robinson's views on matters of policy, barely listened. FDR expected him simply to follow orders, and Robinson followed orders, continuing to push the president's program, in part because his loyalty to presidents had always been strong, in part perhaps because this president kept dangling before him the Supreme Court appointment that was his heart's desire. Joe's job is to keep the Senate pleasingly obedient to the commands of his beneficent master, Alsop and Catledge wrote in 1936. And although the next year Robinson began to show signs of a new independence, that was the year he had his fatal heart attack as he was fighting for the Supreme Court packing bill Roosevelt hadn't even bothered to tell him about in advance. Even this Senate leader, of whom it has been written that he did more than any predecessor
Sample complete. Ready to continue?